All right, so let's dive into this parking license agreement. Crystal Towers residents. This one's for you. Because let's face it, nobody enjoys wading through pages of legalese. It's about as fun as a root canal. But this agreement, whoa, this one takes the cake. Good thing we've got the just want to make Crystal Towers a better place foundation on our side. They've really done their homework and sent over their analysis complete with case law and everything.
They really seem to know their stuff. What kind of things stood out to you from their report?
Well, first of all, the audacity of some of these clauses is mind-blowing. We're talking late fees that would make your head spin, clauses that let them change the rules on a whim, and don't even get me started on what they try to get away with when it comes to liability.
It does sound like they're trying to push the boundaries of what's legally acceptable. It's like they took a crash course in how to write a predatory contract.
Oh, predatory is the right word for it. And JWNCTBP seems to agree. They break it down point by point, and it's wild. Like, for instance, the late fees. We're talking a $250 booting fee if your car is even a tiny bit past the time limit. $250. Like, seriously, who can just drop that kind of cash on a whim? You could buy a decent used bike for that.
Yeah, and that's where things get interesting from a legal perspective. JWMCTBP points out that Westchester County, where your building is, has a law, and it specifically caps booting fees at $65, not $250. Not to mention there's a requirement for them to call the police every single time they boot a vehicle in your county.
Oh man, can you imagine the parking lot drama? The Yelp reviews alone would be legendary. But wait, it gets better. They're also saying they can just up and decide to move your parking spot whenever they feel like it. One day you're parked by the elevator, the next you're stuck out by the dumpster.
Right, and that's where the whole concept of constructive eviction comes into play. What if they move your car to some distant corner of the garage, making the spot practically unusable? The law might interpret that as forcing you out of your parking arrangement, which could spell trouble for them.
So they can't just play musical parking spots with residents' cars. That's somewhat reassuring, I guess.
Okay, but what about this, Jim? We're not responsible for anything that happens to your car while it's parked here. Are they seriously trying to claim zero liability, even if your car gets, like, dented, stolen, or towed away by aliens? Well, they're certainly trying to shield themselves from responsibility. However, JWMCTBP cites a case Ellis v. Airport Parking. Turns out, courts have consistently held that parking garages are considered bailees. That means they have a legal obligation to take reasonable care of the property entrusted to them.
So it's like checking your coat at a restaurant. They can't just say, oops, it vanished, and expect to get away with it. There's some responsibility there.
Exactly. And speaking of responsibility, this next part is a real head-scratcher. They're attempting to prohibit residents from subletting their parking spots. So no more lending your spot to a friend or carpooling arrangements for grocery runs.
Wait, hold up. Seriously. That's crazy. What is this? Some kind of parking police state? What could they possibly be thinking?
It does seem extreme, right? And it might even clash with New York real property law, which allows for subletting under certain conditions. It all boils down to what's deemed as reasonable use. But again, it just highlights how this entire agreement seems designed to make life more difficult for residents.
And this is all before we even get to the part where they imply they could try to evict you from your apartment if you break one of these ridiculous parking rules. I mean, come on.
Yeah, that's where things get really complicated. Evicting someone from their home is a big deal, and New York law lays out very specific procedures for how that's supposed to work. The folks at JWMCTBP suggest this might be an attempt to circumvent those protections by claiming the parking agreement is separate from your lease.
So they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. Trying to use these legal loopholes to give themselves all the power and residents zero recourse. It's just not right.
It's definitely a tactic, and one that raises some serious questions about fairness and transparency. But here's the good news. JWMCTBP has identified potential legal counter-arguments for almost every single one of these questionable clauses.
Okay, so we've got the legal ammo. Now what? What's the plan of attack for our listener who's staring down this contract like it's a monster under their bed?
Well, before we jump into strategies, they should know they're not alone in this. This impacts everyone in the building. And there's one more crucial detail from JWMCTBP's analysis that I think will really pique their interest.
Okay, you've got my attention. What's this game changer that could turn the tables on this whole parking debacle?
Remember those screenshots you sent over, the ones with all the court cases against PLI Management?
Oh yeah, it was like a rap sheet longer than my arm. What about it?
Well, while we can't get into the nitty-gritty of those specific cases, the sheer volume, it speaks volumes, doesn't it? It suggests a pattern of behavior here. This isn't their first time at the radio when it comes to, shall we say, creative legal interpretations.
So it's not just about this parking agreement. It's bigger than that. It's about a company that seems to have a history of, you know, pushing the envelope, testing those legal limits. This is starting to feel less like a parking dispute and more like a John Grisham novel.
Well, the good news is knowledge is power. And now, armed with this information, residents actually have some options. JWMCTBP suggests, as a first step, reaching out to PLI Management directly. Present them with all the legal arguments they've laid out in their report.
So a little we see you maneuver. I kind of like it.
Exactly. There's strength in numbers, right? It's entirely possible that a united front, residents speaking with one voice, might be enough to persuade them to reconsider some of those more, shall we say, aggressive clauses.
Okay, that makes sense. But what if, and let's be real, this is a possibility, what if they just ignore everyone? Or even worse, what if they double down? Then what?
Well, that's when things could get interesting. Remember those tenant rights organizations I mentioned earlier? This kind of situation, this is their bread and butter. They can offer free legal advice, and they are not afraid to go toe-to-toe with companies like PLI.
It's like having a legal dream team on speed dial.
Mm-hmm.
But let's be real for a second. Not every resident has the time or the energy to wage legal warfare, even if it's over something as fundamental as, having a place to park their car.
Absolutely, and that's why it's so crucial for residents to understand the bigger picture here. This isn't just about a parking spot. It's about basic fairness, It's about a company potentially exploiting loopholes, trying to take advantage of people who just want a safe, convenient place to park. It's a matter of principle.
It's about standing up to these kinds of practices and saying, nope, not on our watch.
Exactly. And when you look at it that way, it becomes less about the nitty-gritty of contract law and more about something much bigger, something really important. It's about holding corporations accountable, protecting basic rights, and ultimately creating a more just system for everybody.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. The potential legal landmines, the power of collective action, and even the possibility of, a legal showdown. But where does this leave our listener who's probably at home right now thinking, okay, what do I do? Do I burn this contract? Do I hire a lawyer? Do I start a petition? What's the next step?
Those are all excellent questions, and while, of course, we can't give legal advice on this deep dive, that's what lawyers are for, but we can definitely offer some practical next steps.
Hit me with those action items, expert speaker. What's the first thing our listeners should do after they finish this episode, besides maybe pouring themselves a stiff drink?
Well, first things first, information is power. Print out a copy of that JWMCTBP analysis.
Make sure you've got that legal cheat sheet handy.
Exactly. And take some time to really absorb it. Make sure you understand those arguments, highlight those key legal points.
Got it. What's next?
Next, talk to your neighbors. See if they've even received this new agreement yet. And if they have, what are their thoughts? What are their concerns? You might be surprised by how many people are feeling similarly, blindsided.
Yeah, there's always strength in numbers.
Always. And once you've got a sense of, the building's temperature, so to speak, you might consider organizing a quick little meeting, maybe in the lobby, the common room. It doesn't have to be anything formal, just a chance for residents to connect, share their thoughts, and maybe explore some options together.
A casual parking powwow. Love it.
Exactly. And during that meeting, you can discuss those action steps we talked about, right? Do you want to draft a letter to PLI Management outlining your concerns, the potential legal issues? Do you want to reach out to those tenant rights organizations for guidance? Or maybe even start a petition to really demonstrate the level of, resident dissatisfaction?
It's amazing what a little collective action can accomplish. But let's play devil's advocate for a second. Let's say PLI Management just digs in their heels, refuses to budge. What then?
Well, that's when residents would need to decide how far they're willing to take this, right? They could consider filing formal complaints with consumer protection agencies, maybe contact local media outlets to shed some light on the situation. Or, and this is a worst-case scenario, but they could explore legal action as a group.
Okay, so it's good to have a plan B and maybe even a plan C in your back pocket. But honestly, after learning about all of this, I bet some listeners are thinking, is this even worth the hassle? Should I just find a new place to park?
I understand that sentiment completely. But here's the thing. This isn't just about parking. It's about something much bigger. It's about pushing back against these kinds of practices, against companies trying to take advantage of people who just want a place to park their car.
It's about saying enough is enough when you see something that just isn't right.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe this whole parking saga will spark a larger conversation about tenant rights, about consumer protection in your city.
Now, that would be a deep dive worth taking. But for now, dear listener, you've got this. Armed with this knowledge and hopefully a little bit of that collective spirit, you've got the power to navigate this parking labyrinth. You got this. And hey, if things take a turn for the dramatic, well, you know where to find us.
We'll be here ready to dive back in. Until then, stay informed, stay engaged, and happy parking.